Hello and welcome to today's webinar, where today, of course, we're looking at the opportunity that's out there today. There's kind of a vast amount of opportunity that's now been created off the back of the new planning changes that are in place. And of course, with all that opportunity and being able to unlock that sort of opportunity, the challenge then comes about how do you pay for it? And how do you buy this stuff, given there's so much out there? So I'm delighted to say that we've got Mark Stokes here with us. Hey, Mark, how are you doing?
I'm very well, Paul. Yourself?
Very good. Yes, very well. Thank you. Very well. So for those of you that don't know Mark, we're going to get Mark to kind of take us through the sort of tips and pitfalls about how we can raise private finance. But Mark is, of course, an investor and developer in his own right. He has a training company and he mentors a whole bunch of people too. And he's raised about 28 million quid's worth of private finance. So we sort of feel pretty comfortable that we're in pretty safe hands here to run through all of this. But I suppose, Mark, just before we sort of kick off with all of this, maybe I could just ask you kind of why move into training, kind of sort of with the background that you've got of investment and development, kind of why move into training?
Well, the move into training happened in corporate life, if I'm honest, Paul. I first started mentoring people as part of a leadership program back in 1998 with Nigel Green. Mm-hmm. So we were running very large organizations, scaling globally. We worked across 33 countries, and we needed to create a culture that brought in the best talent, provided diversity and an equitable opportunity for everybody. So we did an in-house training program, mentorship program. I led that, and it's been incredibly successful. And ever since the late 90s, Nigel and I have been mentoring. And in 2015, we decided to hang our boots up in corporate life and retire from corporate life and build that multi-generational legacy with a suite of companies. So it was a logical next step to continue what we love, and that's helping other people.
Amazing, cool. Well, let's kind of jump into today's topic. Really, let's kind of look at the sort of the tips and the pitfalls around sort of raising private finance. And perhaps if I get you to kind of share your screen and let's kick off, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely delighted to. Right, let's have a look here. How's that?
Yeah, beautiful, lovely.
Brilliant. Well, first of all, thank you to the great team at Nimbus, and Paul, thank you for inviting me back.
So welcome back. Yeah,
that's always great. And many of the things we've spoken about in the past has been the genesis of the deal. How do we find the deal? And clearly, your software and systems and processes and expertise is key to any developer wanting to take those next steps. But I think what we both agree as being seasoned developers in our own right, that's part of the equation, finding the deal. Of course, what you've then got to do is create the funding and preparing yourself to be bank fundable. But then the area that probably intimidates many people is the finding private finance. So I want to take you through a bit of a journey and some of the top tips, just very open, transparently, on how I approach that and how I've worked with people and help them raise many tens of millions of private capital to suit their strategy. And I think we can all regale in brilliance of high numbers, 5 million, 10 million, 50 million. But I think we have to dial it back to individual strategies. What is relevant to you? What makes your car go faster and meets your vision and objectives? And for some people, that may just be raising £100,000 or £200,000 and retaining those very valuable investor relationships and creating shared value for decades to come. That might be enough for them. For others, doing large developments. So I think the context is really important. But let me run through the slides and hopefully we'll share some key knowledge here. As I mentioned, the two pipelines. The key, obviously, if you haven't got deal flow, you're not going to get the opportunity. And that deal flow comes in various forms. It could through option agreements, full conditionality, transfer of going concern, where we're buying companies that hold the assets, joint venture structures. And that's a lot of my background in how to structure businesses and structure deal flow. But the other part of probably 25 years of my business career was about indentured investor relations, how to create relationships, how to create structures that are compliant, working with self-certified sophisticated investors, high net worths. Over recent years, over the last 6 years, I've done a lot of work trying to expand people's knowledge and awareness of SaaS. I can't set a SaaS up. I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but when I grab something, get hold of it, I really do shake it and really get to the bottom of what it means and what we can do. And SaaS was a real game changer for us back in 2015. And of course, working on a business-to-business basis with other companies. So you can see how investor relationships, all of a sudden, we're starting to expand and it becomes a very broad church. And that needs to be encompassed with a very clear and coherent strategy.
So the key thing, Mark, is making sure you're managing both those things and managing a pipeline of deals on the one hand, which then you're going to pump into a kind of pipeline of investors at the same time and managing their expectations at the same time. So you're kind of running these two things in parallel, in effect.
Exactly that, Paul. Probably the most common question I do get is, well, which comes first, find the deal or find the money? And the reality is the two have to happen in concert right from day one. And I'll come on to some of the reasons why, but if you want to put yourself under pressure, find a deal and then try and find the money from scratch. That is not a great place to be with the begging bowl out, and that's where people find they're breaching compliance and structures, and it becomes ill thought out and a bit of a lottery, to be honest. So I'll take you through some of those steps of making it clear, coherent, and structured. But I think the basis for us, and it certainly resonated with our investors, was that thinking differently approach. Business for good, about creating shared value where everybody wins out of the relationship. And that means being conservative, being diligent, and not selling, creating the attraction and draw. And in this relationship, and you've seen me present this particular slide before, Paul, because it sits right at the vanguard of our relationships and our strategy. Every party wins. And if we can create value to each one of those parties, then we've got a team that will flow from one deal to the next. And that is just super important for our particular strategy. Cool. Love this quote from Barack Obama: "A change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones who've been waiting for. We are the change we seek." And that's really important that we start with our point of reference. Not trying to copy other people. We're not lemmings. And I see a lot of this in property investment circles where they will show you how to, it's got to be dialed back to your particular strategy. And you're enough, it's not about being fed a fish. We're trying to train people, mentor people in sustainable, compliant and ethical fundraising. In a compliant, making sure we're steering clear of any FCA pitfalls and embracing the governance that they put in place. I think naivety is no excuse, as we know, and I think the lack of knowledge, people are stumbling into naive situations, and you see that on Facebook all the time. So I think that's a great frame of reference. So the number one, somebody said, like, investors are number one. Well, in a timeline, you haven't got investors at the start. You've got a strategy, and you maybe haven't even got that. So number one point of reference for everybody is you've got to know your economic equation. Before you've got the deal, you've got to know your strategy and why you're looking at entering, say, property development as an example. What is that economic equation? How are you looking to earn funds, capital? Are you looking to hold assets? How are you going to protect the wealth? Is it in a SaaS? Is it in a company? Is it an LLP? Capital allowances? Is it tax offsets? How you're reinvesting the funds? It's that, we call it our circular economy for us. Unless you know what you stand for and what your economic equation is, how can you convey that confidence to investors or potential investors, as they might be at this stage? To me, that is an absolutely fundamental baseline. I see people time and time again have the kind of tail wag the dog, and they're trying to change their strategy to suit certain investors. You're not going to please all the people all the time. And it's a bit, I suppose, in similar terms, a bit like the dating game. You know, what is incredibly powerful is if you work with somebody or get to know somebody who understands who they are, what their point of reference is, they're comfortable in their skin, they know their boundaries, they know what they're good at, they know what they're not good at, and this is their economic equation. So I'd really encourage people, I'm not saying don't be flexible, but I'm saying have that clear strategic vision and the economic equation. And if that means...
How does that work in practice? Because I guess one of the things I've always found difficult in sort of business world is trying to refine down just to sort of a narrow thing that you're really focusing on, because focus is so important. But how do you kind of see that? So how do you know, how does somebody watching this kind of know whether they've got the right approach, when they should pivot, when they shouldn't pivot, when they should change that, when they kind of realize they're flogging a dead horse, or whether they should change things? How does that kind of play out for you?
Yeah, we call it a strategic hunting license. You know, we write a mandate to the board, a mandate to ourselves. This is what we're looking for. This is the area, this is the asset class, this is the funding structure. We're going to use development finance. We're going to work with private investors. But that private investor ratio to our capital that we're putting in, is it 10% our capital, 90% private investor capital? And the bank development finance, is it 50-50? Whatever that structure is, are you looking to bring in debt or equity? It's probably not going to be viable if you're looking to buy, develop and retain the assets, albeit in a slightly separate structure, and bringing in private capital on an equity basis or a profit share basis. So it probably means your structuring, given your strategic exit point, is going to be more of a debt-based structure where you bring debt in at whatever, 8, 10, 12% with a certain level of security. And I'll touch on that later. But you need to have clarity in what you stand for and what works for your model. And I've very, very rarely, you know, you can imagine how many conversations I have on a regular basis, helping people to raise funds as well as raising funds for our deals. I can't actually think of a time where somebody else has called our baby ugly. You know, people don't. That's what your model is. Okay, it might not suit me as an investor. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just right for you, and we haven't got the right fit on this occasion. So, you know, having the confidence to try not to please everybody all the time. Of course, once an investor is engaged, I mean, you'll crawl 1,000 miles over broken glass to ensure everybody gets that creation of shared value outcome. But when you're in the origination stage, in a very compliant and governance manner, just got to not be skewed by everybody else's opinion, because you'll never please everybody.
Yeah,
and investors like that. They like to know what you stand for. Yeah,
sure. And I guess the other thing is that if you hear a consistent theme through it, then if you have 5 conversations, they're all saying the same thing to you, you can start thinking about, do I pivot away from what I'm thinking? So you sort of get that sort of customer feedback of whether they like it or not. And if they don't, then right, it's time to pivot and do something slightly different, and perhaps take on the themes that they're saying and build that into my new equation, in effect.
Exactly. I will probably spend an inordinate amount of time, and it's real quality investment time with people on this particular stage. Before a deal comes into the equation, before the investment memorandum, you know, the 3 steps really to raising private capital. It's trusting you as an individual, then understanding, trust and knowledge in the business, and then it's the deal itself. Yeah. So there's
if you don't get that right, it's very hard to trust somebody that because you can kind of feel they're not telling you the truth, and then the whole thing falls down, doesn't it? So if you're not clear on that, and you're not kind of 100% behind it, then it's going to sort of fail later on, isn't it, frankly?
Exactly. And I mean, social media is a terrible place in some respects, but it's a great place in others. You can just see the emotional carnage which happens across social media. You know, people just don't get it. You know, you are who you are. Money just further illuminates who you are in your heart and soul, really. You know, none of us can hold a pretense, nor should we for any length of time. So social media does really out the real people inside. So just being careful what you say. Why would you say something on social media when somebody isn't watching that you wouldn't say to their face? Or, it's just, anyway, we're going off on one. But the point here is it's the circular economy, what works for you. I give you an example of somebody I helped recently. They wanted to raise about 1.2 million for a development, and they needed that development to create cash flow for themselves. And there are half a dozen, well, probably 8 or 9 different areas where you can create cash flow as a developer in a very ethical way, which is a contribution to cost, not extracting profit too early. And so just helping them how to structure that. Now, a couple of potential investors, didn't actually like that model. It doesn't mean to say it's wrong, it just didn't suit them. But that person couldn't continue with that development, and it was a fantastic development, couldn't continue with that development and put the energy to safeguard that investment for the investors, banks, and everybody else, unless it created some cash flow. So that's not right for everybody, but that's the way they looked at it, and they were very successful in raising that 1.2 million. So in raising the investment, there are a number of phases, as I said. First of all, you need to work on building your own identity, and that's for some, that's not as easy as it sounds. It's a lot of soul searching, understanding the strategy of the business, your economic equation, and really building the layers of evidence and getting the story in your own mind that is self-believable. Then that broadcast, that's increasing profile in a way that is conducive and to your business strategy. Creating that personal trust, that's everything. If nobody will look at your business if they don't trust one of the directors. So creating that personal trust is the first significant milestone. Then the business credibility, slight typo there. Then the business credibility is incredibly important. And that doesn't necessarily need track record. I've been an investor in startups for many, many years now, and clearly startups don't have a track record. So it doesn't, and helping people get funding on their first development is quite key. But I'll give you an example, Paul, how we can draw expertise out of people. Working with somebody who has got 12 buy-to-lets, created them over the last 10 years, and now doing a larger development. And the concern that this person had was, I don't have the track record, I don't have the credibility, it's my first development. Well, we re-engineered that discussion and brought that confidence into her that, look, for the first 10 years, I needed to prove to myself that this strategy was viable. I need to create the continuity. And that was phase 1 of my plan. That created my exit path from corporate life. That enabled me to put my own capital in. I felt confident to put my own capital in and make sure I'd proved it and get my money back before I ever decided to approach investors. So it created that story. So rather than it being 10 buy-to-lets and this is our first development, it was the 11th property development that this person was doing. And this person just rose and shone, and he's now just doing amazing things. So great example how that's structured. Then number 5 is structuring the attractive investment. Is it compliant? Who are you sourcing funds from? What particular demographic? Is it company? Is it SaaS? Is it private capital? Whatever that may be. Of course, once that has been brought on board and converted and all the legal documents signed, that's not the end of it. In fact, that's the start of it. I don't know many people who go all in on day one. Generally, people are cautious and they want to dip a toe and, after all that hard work and really find out. I worked for 2 years closely with a potential investor who was an ex-hedge fund manager and really put me through the mill, which was a delight, actually. It's great to be asked lots of intriguing and probing questions because I learn how to, there are just more questions in my armory that I now know the answers to. And after about 2 years, they said, okay, I'll invest. And they decided to invest £25,000. Now, typically investors in our deals might be somewhere in the region of 50 to $500,000. So it was a relatively low amount in context to what we were looking at, but that was fine. That person has subsequently invested nearly £2 million with us, in and out, many times. And that's through active communication, keeping people up to date. We have a very vibrant earn and learn program as well. So again, people are working with us very closely. So you get the opportunity to review, repeat, rinse and repeat, create those relationships. And those relationships, real friendships can form. And when one considers who investors are, and I'm an investor as well as wear two hats, and I think many people on this webinar will probably also think in the same thing. Well, I have funds and I need to invest, but also I'm looking to attract funds. So you'll be thinking and working as an investor, walking a mile in their shoes. There's an incredible amount of diligence here, but you're working with really interesting people who have, through whatever form in life, they've been successful. Therefore, they have capital, they have funds to invest. And many of those have become a close source of wisdom and counsel for us, really close source of wisdom and counsel. They care, they want our business to grow. If they spot something that they think could be done better, or there's an alternative that might suit them more, they'll table it and I'll take it to the board, we'll discuss it. And they feel valued, they feel listened to. We may not always proceed with it, of course, but I'll give them constructive feedback, and so that rapport continues. And that's great. Real friendships come from.
I know how you love your quotes, and so Elon Musk says that the sort of a well-considered critique of what you're doing is as valuable as gold. So I know how you love you can borrow that quote for later if you like it, Mark.
Absolutely, I definitely agree with that. So that walk a mile in somebody else's shoes is so powerful. It was the best piece of advice. I've negotiated hundreds, probably $600 or $700 million of contracts over my corporate career, probably even more than that. And that's the best bit of advice I was given by my first mentor, David McCourt. He's a billionaire now, but he certainly wasn't when he employed me in 1992. And he gave me that advice: walk a mile in someone else's shoes, so you can understand the other side. And actually, many times you can actually create a win-win rather than become, just stagnated in trying to create value for yourself. And that creating shared value is trying to create that shared value for investors. Now, what type of creation of shared value do investors want? And I work with a number of our business partners to create the return on investment to the power of 5. And there are many other ones, but these are the principal ones. That return of my investment, I mean, clearly that's number one. And people can take a screenshot. I won't go through every one of these, but in principle, you want your capital back. Preserve your capital at all costs. Never lose money, as Warren Buffett said. Then you want the return on investment. That could be profit share. It could be debt. So, many different forms. Again, relate that to structure and understanding what element you're looking for. And also that return on time employed as well. Time is one of the scarcest assets most of us have. And best we make sure our structure and our systems embrace that. And then people, I've mentioned our Equa Earn and Learn. People invest in us because they would like mentorship, they want a return on intellect, they want to learn, they join courses or whatever. They want to create that return on interaction because they want to meet people in our community, and then that return of impact. And this I really feel very strongly about. And this is about the societal contribution, that deeper create shared value where it's outside of the project limits. It's how we create that impact in the environment and leave a lasting legacy from a business for good. And you want powerful investor relationships. Show them how they're part of changing the world's problems and solving their problems and yours at the same time. Incredibly powerful. and I should probably let that resonate. We call it environmental, social, and governance. That's right at the heart of the strategy in all of our businesses. Environmental, social, and governance. These are the issues, whether it be climate stability, preserving nature's valuable resources, waste management, innovation, through to social impact, human capital, diversity. Equa stands for equitability, creation of shared value, diversity, and the value in society. But then also the governance as well. Anti-money laundering, anti-bribery and corruption, transparency, strong corporate governance. These are all the core elements that the European Investment Bank and United Nations are driving through government and through banking into our system. And investors are starting to think this way. We've been running ESG since about 2004, 2005. And I've seen how it's rapidly coming up. So it really is professionalizing investment and showing people what their investment will, how it will impact society.
I guess it also drives to values, Mark, doesn't it? It kind of drives to sort of the individual core values as to what you stand for as a person. And then if you attract investors that have that same core value, then trust naturally flows and the whole thing becomes a very positive cycle. So actually, it's a very powerful thing. As you say, it's very powerful because it sort of just explains what your values are and puts them out on a plate for the investor to go, well, do I agree with that or not? And if they do, the chances are, your values fit and therefore you're going to get on well as well. And they're going to kind of back you and support you if you need it, and it's going to work well. So that's how you're going to create that cycle of going from 25 grand to 2 million of investment, isn't it? Clearly.
Exactly that. Exactly. Mm. And here's an example of impact on society. This is a business that Nigel Green and myself, we've invested in, Cornerstone Place. This is supported living, so it creates solutions for street homelessness. And, PwC have put a cost on a homeless person for a year of £27,605 per year. Now, with our strategy of 1,790 rooms, which is equivalent to 653,000 homeless bed nights, and you can see the maths there, that equates to savings to the taxpayer of 49.5 million per year. And we're talking about 10 and 15-year contracts here. Mm. So we're talking about $750 million over the next 15 years of societal savings and impact. Now, as a taxpayer, I really care about that. But what this doesn't calculate is the positive impact it has on children, families, marriage, emotional, mental health and well-being. And that 49 million, if you look at the social resources of a county like Dorset, 750 nurses, 350 firefighters, it will fund all of those in a year, every year for the next 10 to 15 years, as well as making profit. So profit isn't a bad word, but you'll make profit out of solving street homelessness. Yeah, and we'll create $750 million of impact over the next 15 years. I can put my head on the pillow and sleep easy at night on that. And the investors make a return. But it's not about one-hit wonders. This is about sustainability. Hence, don't give somebody a fish, teach them how to fish. Make it sustainable, ethical, and continuous.
Sure.
So just very briefly on Equa and our developments, we use bank development finance. So we practice as we preach, Paul. We work with SaaS, sophisticated investors, limited companies, and our own Equa Capital funding vehicles. We typically do developments in the 2 to 20 million GDV range. We retain 20 to 25% of the units in our asset management company, and we'll sell generally the remaining 70 to 80%. And we do commercial to residential land developments, a lot of commercial hold, which is where a lot of the 28 million of capital that has been raised and most of it returned. We've got projects still in construction and the like. That gives you a bit of an idea of some of the some of the values on some of the developments there. Really like, I like a good quote, Paul. Here's one from Charles Schulz. There is no heavier burden than an unfulfilled potential. And for many, the mental barrier, mental block of private capital is debilitating their ability to deliver these fantastic pipeline of deals that they're finding, and enabling great value for private investors. And it's such a shame, and it's so unnecessary. And that's probably one of the real joys in my life of, why do you do mentorship? Why do you help people? Well, I've been doing it for 20 years because it helps people fulfill their potential. Property isn't the reason, people didn't pop out the womb wanting to own property. It's a vehicle to get them to where they want to go in life, fulfill that potential. And that is really, really very powerful. Just a quick note here. If you want to follow me, the Facebook group is Property Developers and Investors Facebook group and Equa Accademy. And I've always had a kind of 35-year itch I wanted to scratch to become an author. So for the last 4 years, I've written 5 books there on commercial to residential conversion and SaaS and combination of SaaS and property and funding. You can clearly see a direct channel through all of those. So that'll be some additional support. But we said before, there's 2 pipelines, and when's the best time to start? Well, it's yesterday. Well, if you didn't start yesterday, you best start today. And a saying I've used for many years, start with version 1 to get to version 10. Nobody ever started with perfection. Nobody ever ended with perfection. So you just best get started and start to evolve. And that could be drafting out your hunting license, drafting out your funding structure, starting to work with agents, starting to work with your broker, starting to work with me or whoever is supporting you and fast tracking your advancement. But you have to start with version 1, knowing that version 6 or 7 is actually going to be as close to the launch product as possible. And I'll start version 1 on Evernote sometimes, just scribbling a few notes and shaping it in the back of my virtual book. And it's evolving, and I probably have a number of those type of projects at any one point in time. So this will be, hopefully, put a bit of meat on the bone for people in terms of a memorable structure. I won't be able to go through all of these, but I'll give it my best go. So the promised model tries to bring this into a flow, into a system. First of all, you need a process, and I'm talking about a detailed process that enables people to come to you, to be registered as self-certified high net worth or sophisticated investors, to lodge their interest, to pledge, to receive information, KYC, AML checks, the legal suite, through to the onboarding, right the way through to communication and out the back end. There's a process there. It's not difficult, but if you haven't got one, you'll be winging it on the way, and that's not a good look in front of investors. So a bit of forethought is really important. The returns. This is down to the economic model. What are all parties going to get out of this? What are you going to get out of the structure? What are the investors are going to get in terms of their return? I've already told you that for many investors, the return, everybody wants a great economic outcome, but there are other returns that investors are interested in. Some, it will purely be an economic return. Others might want something else. And there'll be varying levels of structure you can put to that. And again, compliance is everything. Options.
Sorry, just on that, I think one of the key things to remember is to ask the investor what they want. It's kind of ask them whether they are bothered about out and out, I just want the highest yield I can make out of it, or if there's something else going on in the background that they're particularly just a pre-qualification question as part of that pitch you're putting in. 100%,
and I think you knew options was coming up there. So,
oh, sorry.
what are those options to investors? You need to understand what the investors want out of life. Is it, they're multiple returns? Are they looking for debt? Are they looking for equity? Are they looking for profit share? Are they looking for preferred rates of returns? So what are those areas? And you may have multiple options to provide them. They may be able to invest on a debt basis here or on an equity profit share on another development. But again, that's knowing what your structure is and what your model is. And M is the model. Knowing actually what your model is, how it works. And I get people to physically draw that model, the flow of cash, where it comes in, the flow of security. And once you know that, a picture speaks 1,000 words, and you can talk forever around that picture, and you can explain to investors how your model works, and get some feedback, whether it works for them or not. But understanding that model is critical. We've talked about the investability, preparing yourself, making sure people understand what you stand for very authentically. Investability might be through corporate literature, case studies, websites. There's many areas there. But one-offs don't make you investable. It's sustained. I get so many calls where people say, I've been following you for 2, 3, 4 years. I just thought we'd reach out and see if we could have a coffee, Mark. That's wonderful. I've no idea what they've been watching and listening to, but there's that consistent traits and behaviors and habits that over time can't be falsified. Then there's a level of security. Everybody's got a view on security. There's very few rights and wrongs. There are some compliance aspects that need to be considered. Again, walking a mile in, maybe it's a SaaS trustee shoes as an example. But understanding what level of security you can give. If you're going development finance and you're working with a private investor who wants first charge, clearly, there's some degree of discussion needs to happen there to explain how that can't happen specifically on that role. But there are on that development, but there are ways. E is for engagement. That's the continuity of communication, engaging with the investors. Could be site visits, not absolutely avalanching them with everything, but keeping them informed. I have some investors who say, Mark, there's the money, don't darken my door again for 2 years. I have others who literally want to call every month and want to be kept updated, and both are fine. We're dealing with people here. This is people and relationships. And finally, and this is really, I guess, the holy grail for all parties really is creating that draw. Creating that draw where people are attracted to you, what you stand for, your message, your temperament, your moral compass bearing, rather than putting posts out on social media saying, does anybody want to invest in me? That's a little bit of a blunt instrument, I think you'll agree. So there are different ways to achieve that. And ultimately, you as the developer raising the funds, you need to do something that sits right for you. You've got to put your head on the pillow and sleep easy at night. It must be a pretty awful way to live your life if you're doing something every day, raising funds in a manner that just doesn't feel comfortable. So my advice is, find a model and a system and a structure that works for you. And again, that's where I work quite tirelessly, helping people, get to that point. So the development process, and this might be really helpful for people. I've had various versions of this, but find people really like to see a development in fairly simplistic terms laid out in front of them. How does a development work? And generally it's this order of events. What you find most investment memorandums and structures and conversations with investors, when I get approached, people will always talk about the front end and the returns and the security, but they won't talk about the risks and how your credibility navigates the risks along the line. And very rarely do they talk about how I get my money back at the end and how I get my returns back at the end, which is what I'm really interested in, to be honest. So, the process of setting up an SPV and then closing that SPV, paying the taxes and the returns and the sequencing of events. And when you look at that, doing a commercial to residential conversion in 12 months or so generally people are referring to the timescale because that's how long the builders told them it will be. But you've got the design, the tendering, you've also got the back end closing of the all the liabilities of the company and the accountancy. So again, it's the business acumen. We're in business. We're not in property. We're in business, which happens to have a hard underlying asset class. I've mentioned compliance a number of times, and just in these last few slides, I really want to impress on the importance of having a rolling audit file. That audit file needs to be there for you, for your moral compass bearing. It needs to be there for your investors as well, for the various legal teams, particularly if you're working with SAS trustees, and SAS trustees have a bandwidth that they can operate within. So that's really important as well. And my experience in working with SAS trustees and my experience of being a SAS trustee has certainly helped us overcome that and be constantly aware and vigilant. Because the last thing you want to do ever is to put private capital funds at risk, to put somebody's pension at risk, to see them, I mean, it'd be cataclysmic in terms of reputational damage if one of anybody's investors got an HMRC penalty tax charge. So just being acutely aware of doing things right. There's another quote to close things off gradually. If everyone is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. And that's what I like about these webinars, Paul, that we do. You know, we're challenging thought, we're challenging process all the time. We're not sitting on our laurels. We're not becoming complacent because the world is changing out there. You know, you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. But it's worse than that. If you do what you've always done, you'll continually get less and less because your relevance will decrease over time as everybody else is changing. And the being relative to your investors, relating to them. Many of my conversations with very high net worth individuals, SAS trustees, investors of all levels, I meet people time and time again. I could probably meet somebody 3, 4, 5 times, and we're not talking about private investment, not even touched on it. What we might be talking about is tax efficiency, business, friendship, life, the book I wrote on advice to your younger self. Generally, most of our investors are in their 30s through to their 60s. So generally, many of them have got kids, some of them got grandchildren. So they want to create that multi-generational legacy. And I'm really inspired by that. I've got 4 children myself, and Nigel's got 4 as well. So quite often we talk about things that inspire. I met one of our high net worth individuals who didn't know about SAS. So I took him along a copy of the Property and SAS Secrets book, signed a copy, and we spent a couple of hours talking about SAS. He was absolutely fascinated by it. So it's great to be able to give rather than just go and almost pointing the red dot sniper rifle on somebody's chest and trying to pick off investors. Again, that's not a nice way to live your life. And if you can be inspired by being around people who are high achievers in a diverse and eclectic array of businesses, you know, that's wonderful. So in summary, Paul, you know, how I help people create clear strategy and roadmap for their business, which more often than not involves property, to create and build that constant deal flow. And that's something clearly we work with Nimbus on. How to excel at bank grade due diligence and the deal analytics. We have our Equa IDA modeling system for that, and mastering raising private capital and mastering the mindset as well as the structuring of it, creating that recurring cash flow and structuring deals effectively, understanding the difference between risk and opportunity, and that simulation and anticipating what could happen and running through all those scenarios, and confidently growing one's business. So I hope that's added some degree of value to your audience today, Paul, on some of the things that are fundamental to us.
Absolutely. Well, what I'd like to do next is I would like to just sort of move on to this next bit. This next bit is the bit that gets me all kind of hot under the collar, frankly. And that next bit is this thing that we so delightfully called deal in 90 seconds, which is me going off and finding a deal. And what I want to do today actually is sort of create something slightly different from what we usually do here. So first off, I want to go and find a deal in 90 seconds to prove that we can, and something that's kind of broadly in line with what the kind of things that Mark's doing. But what I want to do after that is then talk about how do we build that funnel of investors, and how do we then talk to those investors and build that credibility that we kind of need in those early stages of those discussions, in effect. So what I would like to do is I'd like a bit of audience participation, if I could. What I'd like you to do is, if you could open up the chat for me and suggest some locations. So Barry's popped in Oxfordshire into the chat. He was very quick to type that in, actually. So perhaps if we could have a look in the chat and see, perhaps Mark, could you have a little dig through that and just see if you can pick me a location off the back of that, and just see where you'd like me to search. Ideally, well, in fact, you choose. I won't lead the witness at all, but I'd like you to kind of just pick one of those for me, if you could.
Okay, how about Hemel Hempstead?
Hemel Hempstead, absolutely. So there's one rule in this bit about the 90 seconds. The 90 seconds starts when I start searching. I want to just understand the area first and make sure that we've got a sort of a good opportunity to drive value in the location effect. So the first thing I want to do is I want to understand Hemel Hempstead as a place. So the first thing I need to do is just jump into the overlays on the Nimbus Maps Elite platform and just look at some values. So what I can see is, firstly, the good parts of Hemel Hempstead. This is showing me average residential sales values across Hemel Hempstead, in effect, grouped by the neighborhoods that they relate to, in effect. Those little white lines, sort of little wiggly lines that are across the map, that's showing me neighborhood boundaries across Hemel Hempstead. So I can see kind of to the north of Hemel Hempstead, there's kind of a weaker part of town. To the south, there's some stronger areas. And actually, I would much rather be searching in St Albans, where the values are kind of 50% higher. But I've been given Hemel Hempstead, so I will go where I'm told is the moral of the story. So the first thing I can understand is kind of I want to be in these sort of southern parts ideally, because the values are stronger. It's a better part of that area than otherwise. I always want to just check if they're an HMO. Is there kind of an alternative use that I might be able to kind of take us through? Mark's talked about kind of risk management and this sort of stuff. So if I'm going to do a residential scheme, I'm going to convert from one thing to another, pick a hot strategy. I'm guessing we might do Class MA. In fact, I probably will go Class MA. But in essence, what I want to understand is if I've got a change of use, then is there, if I've then got a residential scheme that's coming off the back of it, can I let in that location? Do I have to sell? Can I do HMOs in that area? Kind of, is there a marketplace? And actually, across there's a few HMOs. These little red spots are showing me all the HMOs across the map, in effect. So I've got a kind of an understanding of where I want to be, and this is now where, Mark, I need your help. So what I would like to ask you to do is to get your phone out and start the timer on that clock for me, if you could. And I've got 90 seconds to now go and find an opportunity in Hemel Hempstead. And I'm going to hopefully get one that's about 2 million quid's worth of GDV. It's going to be a bit difficult because we've only got 400 quid a foot sales value in this area, but that's what we're going to aim at. So, Mark, are you ready? 3, 2, 1, let's go. So, this is my Class MA strategy here. So what we've got is we've got a Class E uses, and I'm just sort of trying to find. This looks quite interesting, doesn't it? There's a big old lump there. So let's just see what this is. It's got a sort of bit of residential foot. In fact, I'm not sure I like that particularly. Let's have a look at this one instead. So we have a GDV of 3 million quid. So I'm feeling confident here, Mark. We've got residential around this particular property. So what it's showing me is that this is a vehicle repair shop. That's a new Class E property. I think we can switch the timer off, Mark. I think I'll come to I've smashed this one. So what it's showing me is that this is a 6,000 square foot vehicle repair centre. It's surrounded by residential property. That's part of what the Class MA strategy is doing. It's putting a sort of residential feel to that particular location, in effect. It's saying it's 6,000 square feet, and it's saying that the sales values across this part of Hemel Hempstead, so I've kind of picked that sort of southern part, which is kind of got the higher values, is about 520 a foot. So it's the thing I was showing you on the market section. We're showing you average sales prices. We're going to build new housing here, therefore it'll be higher price than the average. You know, that includes the good, bad, and the ugly, the avocado bathroom suites, and all that kind of stuff is all part of that average. And we're building better than that. So it's going to be about 520 a foot. It's looking at a conversion, because that's Class MA looks at conversions. We might do something more comprehensive than that. But in essence, this is giving me a sort of a baseline. And it's saying conversion costs across this part of Hemel Hempstead are about £115 a foot in effect. It's saying that the rental level for that building is about £750 a foot. And if we pay 6% net, which seems like a pretty sensible yield for something like that in that location, then these are the numbers that come out the back of it. So it's got a £3 million, just over £3 million GDV based off that 520 a foot sales price. We've got a purchase price of 700 grand and a conversion cost of 700 grand too, in effect. That would then give us an overall profit level of 1.7 million, which is about 126% return on cost. Now what we've talked about today is how do we structure that deal? How do we get the owner perhaps to leave that building in, let us get a planning consent, buy it subject to, going to squeeze the time down we need that investor finance for, it's going to mean we pay less out on that investor finance, it's going to de-risk it for the investors too. So all of that kind of good stuff in effect. So I can share some of that profit. If I want a 25% return on cost, I've got an awful lot of extra I can pay over and above that purchase price, 700 grand, to get the owner of the building to kind of hold that and then sell it to me subject to planning or an option agreement, of course. So very quickly, I've got my deal. So let's just kind of save that into, in effect, what I do is I add that to my workflow, and I then go off and start to go and, in effect, mail campaign these owners. There's very quick ways of doing that through the workflow. We can send lots and lots of letters, which then allow us to find lots of opportunities, managing those sort of two funnels that we're looking at, the supply of sites and also the supply of investors. And today, as I say, what I'd like to do is I'd like to move away now from this site finding element. So this sort of strategy has done an awful lot of stuff for me. It's checked the use, it's checked that it's not listed, doesn't flood and all that kind of good stuff. And so that was really kind of what the information panel will tell me. It's going to give me a load of information about that particular property, who owns it, all that kind of good stuff, and sort of what's on it and things. But today now we're talking about investors. Now, for me, what those sort of investors are kind of interesting for is to say, well, actually, the investors that you want are the ones that are buying similar kind of buildings. If I'm going to buy a vehicle repair shop, I want an investor that really understands kind of commercial property. If I'm going to go and convert that into residential, I'm going to knock it down and put residential on it. Perhaps I do a class MA to establish the change of use on it, and then I go back in with a full application to knock it down and build a lot more on it. Then I want a developer or investor from this area that kind of understands that sort of property. So the way I'm going to do that is two things. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the filters over here, and I'm going to look at my commercial comparables. So why am I looking at commercial comparables? Commercial comparables, surely, Paul, are all about how do we justify the value of this particular building in effect? Well, yes. But of course, a commercial comparable also means that there's somebody behind that bought that building. So what this is showing me here is what are all of those properties across this area that have changed hands, that were in commercial use when they changed hands? Because of course, the person that bought that is then likely to understand the building that I'm now proposing to go and buy this vehicle repair shop in effect. So I can go off and I can actually add that lot to my workflow as well. And I can then go and write a letter to all of these people that bought these things. So for example, over here, this property was a restaurant with a self-contained flat above it. Mohammed Riaz Properties Limited bought that property, and they've bought that within the last few years. They bought it in October 2019. This is the company itself. So what I could go and do is I could go and ring Mohammed Riaz by Googling Mohammed Riaz Properties Limited and finding their phone number. And I could ring Mohammed and say, well, we'll get through to the reception and say, well, I'd like to speak to Mohammed, please. And they'll say, what do you know what it's regarding? And I'll say, no, it's about a new matter. It's about the K2 restaurant that he's just bought in Hemel Hempstead. That will get me through the gatekeeper. And then when I actually speak to Mohammed, so really interesting that you bought that property in K2 restaurant up in Hemel Hempstead. Are you looking for anything else at the moment? Because I saw, there's something I'm looking at around the corner that may be of interest to you. Do you have an appetite to invest? Kind of what sort of stuff are you interested in? And we can start that pre-qualification process that Mark's talked about. What does this investor want? What is it that kind of floats his boat that might get him interested in working with me in effect? And of course, what I've demonstrated is that I know what's in his portfolio. I can go into the point of saying, well, actually, show me all the properties in that portfolio. I can then go and pick some interesting stuff out of that, just trying to pique his interest to see, well, actually, I'm proving that credibility that I understand the stuff that he's got. I understand when he bought it. I can find out what he paid for it. And I can really then drive into the detail around all of that to sort of build that credibility with him. So that's the first place I can go. And of course, what I can see is that I've got 10 or 15 people that are within a kilometre of that particular property that have an understanding of commercial buildings, that have bought stuff in the last couple of years with an address that they bought and a location. I can write them a letter if I want to, and write to 5A Parr Road, Stanmore in wherever. I can write them a letter, or I can go and try and ring him if I can. So I can build that pipeline of investors that have bought commercial properties around that location. The second thing that I can do is that down here I can see that Decorum is the council that covers this particular area. And what we also have within the Elite platform is this thing that we affectionately call the planning export. So what this is going to do is going to go off and search Decorum planning authorities planning portal in effect. And it's going to look for a bunch of things which are going to in effect say residential opportunities or residential planning applications that have gone in. And I'm going to export that into Excel, because what it's going to do when I do that, it's going to say, where do I see in effect planning applications that have a sort of residential feel to it? Because we're going to go and convert this building, we're going to knock it down and build some flats on it, or whatever we're going to do with that. And we sort of work out what our scheme looks like when we get some feedback from the owners that want to sell that building or one of the other buildings that I'm looking at in the area, in effect, off that strategy. What I can see here then is a whole bunch of planning applications in effect. This is some discharge of conditions that are coming off as demolition of 33 single-story garages and putting nine units on it in effect. What we've got then on the right-hand side is it's then linking that through to the owner's details for that particular property. So if I just enable the editing here, what I can then show you is that on the left-hand side, we have planning applications for residential development. And in the middle here, what we then have are the owner's details and the date they bought those properties. So if I then filter that and say, well, just show me those properties that have sold in, say, the last 3 years, then what I get is a list of companies that are then submitting planning applications on properties they've bought in the last few years for residential development, which means here I have a list of locally active developers that I can then go and contact to and say, to MO Properties London Road Limited, I can say, I saw you bought the former Chipperfield garage in Langley Road in Chipperfield. Just wondering if you're looking for anything else. I may have some opportunities. I see a lot of opportunities. I'm busily working out and looking for opportunities. Is that something you might be interested in? What kind of stuff are you interested in? And I can again start that pre-qualification process for these developers. And I suppose the final thing that perhaps is interesting off the back of this is that having identified a list of the locally active developers, on the far right-hand side of this, what it then shows me is who the agents are that those people are using and trusting to submit their planning applications for them. So across Hemel Hempstead, I can start to see who those locally active architects and planners are that support the local developers. So what's that black book of that local developer, and who do they trust their schemes? When they've gone and bought a particular site, these people think Jefferson Shepherd Architects are the ones to go for across that particular location. And we could perhaps just do some very simple stuff, like maybe see them in order, see, well, who are they, excuse me, which of these architects are coming up most in effect, and go and in effect go off and speak to them to make sure we've got the right scheme, so the right design team. And of course, that's then how we can also build credibility with our investors, is to say that I've picked a team that is then either perhaps the team that the developer would use themselves, in which case they trust the architect that you're using to submit your scheme, or indeed we can prove that the credibility that we've got off the back of having a quality design team sat behind us, and we can then show some of the schemes that have been designed up and show how those went forward to help build that credibility as part of it. So hopefully that's been interesting. I hope. What I usually do is I do a deal in 90 seconds and then sort of talk about Nimbus story time. We look at the property, we look at the owners, we look at the surrounding area and this sort of stuff. But I felt today it'd be kind of interesting just to see, well, where do I get a list of investors from? How do I then create that credibility with them? We can use Nimbus to build that due diligence piece. We can look at residential comparables, we can look at commercial comparables, we can look at commercial availability. We can build that entire piece to say, what's stuff selling for? What's my GDV? What's that selling for? What am I buying? What's that worth? What are the quoting prices in the area? What are they sold for? And build all of that rich kind of story that you want to tell your investor, build all that together very quickly, click of a few buttons, quite frankly, and then send that all across. So then we've built that credibility very quickly. So hopefully that's been useful. I feel like I've kind of talked enough. I wanted 90 seconds to find a deal. I think I found, was it within 90 seconds, Mark?
Yeah, it's 28.3 seconds, Paul.
Good, very good, very good. Well, I'm frustrated about the 0.3, but we'll take it. We'll take it. Fabulous. So let's just run through. So we're going to move into the Q&A in a thank you, Tala. I'm telling me it's much too slow. So we're going to move into the Q&A in a second. Before we do, what I'd just like to say, so if anybody's interested in having a play with Nimbus, this is kind of typically your journey with Nimbus. You come into us, you have a little free trial of our sort of 14-day free trial of our elite platform. As part of that, you typically have a one-to-one demonstration with our team. They'll show you how to use the system in the various different ways. I've just sort of scratched the surface on a few little bits and pieces around how that can help. We then typically, if you like it, you can sign up to the Elite platform, and you may then upgrade to the Elite Plus system, which kind of gives you some strategies, some sort of buttons that just kind of identify properties on the map for you. So if you'd like to take advantage of that, there's a bit.ly link at the bottom. I'm going to pop that into the chat in a moment. Mark, if people want some support from you as well, how can you help?
So yeah, there's a number of ways that we can help. We help mentor people over many years. We've got a commercial conversion and development program. We've done about 90 million of developments, over 300 apartments over the last 5 years. So we're going to be taking people through a very unique program. It's over 3 months. It starts on Wednesday, the 22nd of September. And there's a special £200 off code there. So if you go to www.equaacademy.co.uk and put in the code Nimbus to your great guests on this webinar, there's £200 off. And I think on the next slide, you might have a QR code as well. So we'll take you through over a 3-month period. And there'll be lots of knowledge there. And there'll also be staging of that information. There'll be some homework and actions. You also get an opportunity to have a couple of calls with myself and also with Nigel Green. Nigel looks at our land and new homes acquisition team. And then we also have a site visit as well. So a very comprehensive program there. And we'd love to help you out over the next 3 months, starting Wednesday, the 22nd of September. So don't forget to put in the code in the box, Nimbus, to get your £200 discount.
Fabulous. So we're going to take a very short break while we get ourselves ready for the Q&A session. Just while we do, if anybody would like further information from Nimbus, I'm just launching a quick poll now for that first question with you. If you'd like a follow-up from the team at Equa Academy, that second question will be for you. We're just going to take a short break. We're back in literally 2 minutes, and we will see you in a moment, ready for the Q&A session. Fabulous. Thank you very much indeed for that. So we are now good to go. So if anybody has a question for us, what we would like you to do is to open up your little Zoom control panel if you could. And then what I'd like to do is to be a button on that Zoom control panel that says raise hand. If you can click the raise hand button, then what we will do is we will bring you up, we'll get you to unmute yourself, we'll then ask you to ask your question live, and then Mark and I will do our best to answer those questions for you live right here, right now. There were a couple of questions in the Q&A, just while we wait for people to run through that.
There's one there from Simon.
Question there from Simon. Yeah, I was looking at that. So what are your top few strategies for raising new funds / meeting new investors?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, that, Simon, because obviously the world has changed over the last 18 months. Many people haven't been able to get out, meet new people, and face-to-face contact, body language and rapport is incredibly important in building up that trust. So I think increasingly people have had to be more resourceful in terms of how they get their message out, how they let people know they're open for business and what they actually do, what they believe in, understand. Webinars, Zoom, I mean, how many times have we all said in the last 18 months, take yourself off mute? It's a very different language, but collateral is incredibly important. Blogs, videos, things that are evergreen, regular, being part of people's habitual habits. We have a podcast, Property Portfolio Podcast. So it's somewhere where people know they can go and get really detailed information. So what is your go-to information? How do you bring the information that you generate, and rather than just spray it across social media, how do you create some resonance there and build up a following, an audience, so that over a period of time, you too will get people call you and say, been following you for a while, really interesting stuff. Could we have a coffee, virtual or otherwise? So it's just a few areas and different takes on it, which might be helpful, but it's certainly an area that one needs to work pretty hard. And again, it's one of those first things that we look at to work out a strategy. It's fine people saying, look, go and join a local tennis club or go and join a local golf club and surround yourself with lots of people who've got lots of money. It's pretty dull if you don't like golf or don't like tennis. So you've got to find something that works within your ecosystem. But it's amazing what people miss and their professional network. One thing that happened to me, Paul, when I left corporate life, I only had two employers in corporate life over 25 years. Had probably 60 different roles all over the world. So when I left, there was a lot of intrigue as to, well, where are you going? So I know many people are leaving or want to leave their day job. When you announce you're leaving, it creates that intrigue. Well, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to create a number of multi-generational businesses and create shareholding for my family and loved ones. People are thinking, well, that's great. How do I do that? You can see that conversation. So again, creating that draw, lots of people saying, well, can I understand how you're doing that? Because I might want to do something like that as well. Sure. There's a couple of angles on that for you.
Amazing. Well, there's kind of two things that again. So Barry, who put the first comment into the chat, and I felt like he was B of the bang. I felt like he read my mind as where I was going with that. I think he feels a bit upset that I haven't actually done South Oxfordshire Oxfordshire rather in the deal in 90 seconds. So if we get 90 seconds. Ellie's put her hand up, so we'll go with Ellie's question first, and then I'll go and do a deal in 60 seconds in Oxfordshire just to keep oops, sorry, I just muted you. I was about to ask you to unmute yourself, and I've muted you again, so apologies. Perhaps if I could get you to unmute yourself, Ellie, then we'll... Hey, Ellie, how you doing?
I'm fine, thank you.
Very good.
Hi, Ellie.
Hi there, hi, Mark. Yeah, my question is, basically, I've got a couple of investors that are just about to come on board. Could you just clarify, I mean, I think I know, but could you just clarify how I qualify them as investors and what is needed for compliance?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And the truth is it starts right at the start, right at the origination. We've built that into our website so that if somebody wants to put an inquiry, if it's an investor related inquiry, they have to tick a disclaimer, they have to tick whether they're self-certified high net worth. Now, what you've said is you're about to bring them on board. So I would be producing a 1 or 2 pager, which is an AML and KYC document, which asks them to, and you can get your solicitor to produce this. It has a different level of resonance where you're getting their certified ID. And again, do you want to see that? Or you really want your solicitor to have it in their hands? Anti-money laundering checks, and for them to self-certify their high net worth or investor status. But it's building, I can't stress enough, it's building that timeline and the flow of what happens and when. It's very dangerous to be presenting an investment memorandum to people who haven't been pre-qualified. So I'm really great. It's great that you've asked this question at the very earliest stages. So first of all, I'd produce that 1-pager that distills down what is a sophisticated investor, what is a high net worth, explain to them that from an FCA 13.3 perspective, if there's any discussion related to anything like that, you need their self-certified first. That's stage 1. That permits you then to start having some conversations and to listen, determine, ask some questions. What do they really want? This isn't a sales exercise. And then we get our professional team involved in the onboarding process where there's documents. When you're bringing parties on board, you haven't mentioned the terms, and I won't ask you the terms, but if you're offering somebody a second charge or a debenture or some form of security that's not a first charge, it tells me that, you know, there's a bank involved.
Yeah.
And the bank will also want to do KYC and AML checks, anti-money laundering and know your customer checks. And you must, when you're engaging with your broker, engaging with the bank, you must understand deed of priorities and deed of subordination documents, things like that are going to be sort of impregnated into the process. Otherwise, you'll have a real convoluted flow process. So I would have a chat with your broker and find out what information the bank need, if that's relevant in your circumstances. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Yeah, I mean, I've had meetings with them. They're actually 2 friends, so I've known them for a long time. So we've been through the chats and, you know, what they're expecting, what they, you know, do want to do, don't want to do, sort of thing. So it's just coming up to that point now where I need to sort of start doing all the compliance and the legal side of things.
It's all about the audit file, and even though they could be friends, they could be family, they're not excluded from the auspices of 13.3. So early as possible, just for their protection as well as yours. Ask them to sign that, and that becomes part of the process. And again, it's a great question. It's got so many angles to it, Ellie. Just because somebody, if you think the way the world's gone in 18 months, just because somebody was a self-certified high net worth, let's say 2 years ago, doesn't mean they are now. So we have a process where we may well revisit that on at least a biannual, probably an annual basis, which can be very helpful. And then you're on top of the game, and it's another touch point with the investors midway through a development, but it also brings your professional team in at a stage, and then you see that preeminence and professionalism. When you've worked hard working with a private investor, answering their questions, or a potential private investor, and then you're faced with anti-money laundering checks, it can sometimes feel a bit of a challenge to then say to somebody, and I want you to prove it's not from ill-gotten gains. So a great way of doing that is to bring your solicitor in, and they provide that process, and everybody trusts a solicitor, and then you just hand that channel of evidence and an audit trail over to your solicitor, because the last thing you want is somebody else's bank account. You just need a solicitor to verify that it is from bona fide means.
Okay,
and particularly when it's friendships, Ellie, Again, it's a bit awkward to ask for somebody's bank account or proof of funds. So just a great way of using, everybody trusts a solicitor.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Ellie. Right. So I feel like I need to sort out this little unfinished business in Oxfordshire, if that's okay. So we're just going to quickly. So what we could have done, if I didn't feel that Barry was too quick on the draw, is do a very quick search in Oxfordshire, in effect. So I suppose one of the things I always think is interesting with Oxford and Oxfordshire is sort of this. Let's just this one instead. Is this kind of this pocket of value that is Oxford? Is kind of really brings to life that sort of that initial search that I always do on these things, is to understand that little area. And so you can sort of see, the Oxford and the colleges and the kind of the POM. I mean, goodness knows why anyone cares about Oxford, because there's a better university, obviously, which let's not bring that, let's not go there. But in effect, the sort of that pocket of opportunity, that pocket of value that is the centre of Oxford at sort of £700 a foot, that very quickly dissipates as you come out of Oxford. And so any deals that you're doing in Oxford, it's very important to know that they aren't directly comparable. And so this is, I always think, is a very interesting thing to look at, because you have this, you sort of see this in other places like Sandhurst and like Eton and places like that. We have this kind of pocket of very, very strong values, with sort of outside of that is actually kind of much lower. So places like York are the same, and Harrogate and places like that, in effect. And so I always find that kind of interesting to look at that. And of course, with the university in Oxford, there's obviously a huge number of HMOs that sort of sit alongside that and within those areas, of course. And that kind of, I think, brings opportunities in their own right. Kind of always the thing I always kind of like about some of these sort of university towns is there's usually an Article 4 in place for your HMO opportunities, and those then people kind of look at it and go, it's just too hard to try and convert a house into HMOs, even though there's a huge marketplace for student housing in places like Oxford. They just think it's too difficult, and that's kind of why we developed strategies 7 and 8, which is the sort of residential to HMO opportunities. And so with all of those HMOs that are in those areas, those Article 4s become a problem. It's very difficult to find where the pockets of opportunity are. And of course, that's what strategy 7 does for the elite platform. So, well, where do I see opportunities where I can go and find a single house that sits in a road, lots of HMOs on it, but actually where the Article 4 calculation for that particular property would actually work. And that's what this shows us here, in effect. And so very quickly, I mean, I might do a deal in 90 seconds here. So what this is showing me here is that as a particular property there, which is Article 4 area for HMO conversion, this is a single house right in the centre, just not quite in the centre of Oxford, but just off the centre of Oxford. So there's HMOs all around this area. And what it's saying is that the density of HMOs within 50 metres of that location is just 5%. So typically you can get away with 10%, and therefore converting this property into HMO is very likely to get support, even though it's in an Article 4 area. And what that typically means, developers look at it and go, I'm just not going to look in Oxford because it's just too hard. I could look at 50 houses and find they're all too close to other HMOs. It's just too hard to do, which is the real beauty of this strategy, frankly, is it's running those calculations for you and just saying, well, where are those pockets of opportunity across Oxford where we can just kind of just pull out the single properties that are going to work for that, rather than I suppose there's actually this kind of the odd road that kind of works with that, sort of odd areas within those roads where that all kind of works in effect. And I just kind of pop that HMO opportunities back on, because what in effect you're seeing is a little pocket of opportunities around here where here it doesn't work, but of course this little road here is a handful of houses where you could convert those, and then you use things like the little OS master map overlay to sort of say, well, actually, if I can buy the small house here which hasn't had the big extension put on it, then of course that's where I can really drive good returns out of these opportunities in effect. Now, I've kind of gone a bit off piste with that, because I just like HMOs in university towns, because there's strong opportunities. You can drive some great returns off the back of those. You can often get your money back out of them. You can convert it into a commercial yield, and so there's kind of some really interesting reasons why that might be interesting. But of course, in Oxford with those strong values, or indeed maybe I'll make my life a little bit harder and come out of the centre of Oxford and go to somewhere like Cowley or something like that, and just see, well, can I go and find some opportunities that are of the right sort of size and shape that that Mark might be interested in? Well, there's something down here. I don't know what this is. Let's have a little look. So there's an office building down here with all of these residential properties around it, in effect, which again, this has got much lower values. It's 460 quid a foot, 6,000 square foot office. It's got that kind of north of £2 million GDV that Mark's been looking for. We're going to be buying this for 1.1 million, 15 quid a foot rent, assume 7% net. This is not the best part of Oxford. This is kind of on the outskirts of Oxford. Sort of chosen that for a reason, because often in the centre of Oxford, a lot of stuff's going to convert £700 a foot average sales values, of course. And this has got a 50% return on cost off the back of it. So again, plenty of margin to bring that down to 25% return on cost, keep our investors happy. They're making enough return. You've got money in there to pay them their returns, of course, and yet still share some of that with the owner of this particular property. And off we go, in effect. So we can carry on, same principles apply, where we can go off and search the planning portal for residential developers in that area. If we're going to convert to residential, off we go. So we can find them. That same process I've just shown in Hemel Hempstead, which is only a little, not too far away actually, in terms of that location. And of course, using the commercial comparables to go and see, well, who are the people that have bought buildings in that area? And off we go. And Barry, if you'd like to do that yourself, then feel free to jump on a free trial with us and have a little play with that and sort of see how we see what we can find for you there. So hopefully I've set the position straight in terms of all of that. Fabulous. Now I'm just kind of conscious. Is any more questions that have come up in the chat while I've been going on? Jay's talked about brownfield land registers and Schulz. I don't know what your sort of take is on that, Mark, but I'm not convinced that that's the richest vein of opportunity at the moment. So looking at Schulz and brownfield land registers, sort of, it's a bit kind of old. It's sort of been around a while and people sort of hit it already.
Yeah, no, that's not a rich hunting ground for us, to be honest. No, I think there are more readily available opportunities with less gremlins lurking, to be honest.
Sure. And I think that's my sort of take on it, is that there's lots of people kind of have hammered those lists already, and sort of, if they're willing to be sold, then it's kind of gone now, rather than
I think some of those brownfield sites, the ones that have done well in the past, have certainly got their timing right and latched into grants, European investment grants and redevelopment grants, which have been very powerful. I've got some good friends who really made some phenomenal gains in that area. But like we don't. It's not to say some won't, but
sure. Fabulous. Right. Well, I'm just conscious of time here, Mark. So what I'm going to do is, I think all that really remains for me to do is to firstly, I'm just whistling through getting this sorted out. Firstly, to thank you, Mark, for your time today. Thank you for a great presentation. There seems to be lots of positive comments in the chat for you. So thank you very much indeed for all of that.
Pleasure. No, I really enjoyed it, and it's great to draw this together with great tools that Nimbus have got, how you find sites, and follow that through to how you convert sites into ownership, which you need the funds, and the two work in concert. So thanks again, Paul. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And then finally, just thank you to you all for watching. It's been lots of fun again today. I've been Paul Davis. We've been Nimbus Maps. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. All the best. Bye for now.